On March 14th, analysts using open-source satellite tracking systems noticed something unusual moving across the South China Sea. It wasn't a destroyer or an aircraft carrier, but an amphibious assault vessel, USS Tripoli, LHA-7, traveling at remarkable speed, leaving behind a wake so large it was visible even from orbit. On its flight deck were as many as 20 F-35B stealth fighters, while inside its hull were roughly 2,500 Marines. Its destination, Hormuz. Now here is the part that should give pause. Only a few days before Tripoli was observed speeding southward, President Trump appeared at a podium and publicly victory. According to him, Iran's military had been effectively crushed. Karg Island, the central hub of Iran's oil export infrastructure, responsible for nearly 90% of its crude shipments, had, in his words, been completely destroyed. 60 Iranian naval vessels were reportedly lying at the bottom of the Gulf. Missile production facilities that had supplied the Hormuz region for 4 decades were reduced to rubble. Drone manufacturing lines had stopped operating. Meanwhile, 2 U.S. carrier strike groups, the Lincoln positioned in the Arabian Sea and the Ford in the Red Sea, were maintaining the perimeter. A third carrier, the Bush, was still en route across the Atlantic. From the outside, it all appeared to be a conflict already decided. So why then was the United States deploying one of its most powerful amphibious assault ships across the globe to a war that was supposedly already finished? That question matters, because the answer exposes something the Pentagon has not openly acknowledged, and something the financial markets had already recognized before military leaders admitted it. Consider the number that cuts through every press briefing and declaration of victory. Brent crude remains priced above $100 per barrel. More than 150 oil tankers remain anchored outside the strait, steadily incurring fuel costs as they wait. Their insurers have not approved movement. Their captains have not moved either. The global shipping industry, an industry that evaluates risk for a living, has examined every American airstrike, every destroyed Iranian vessel, every bombed facility, and still concluded that the risk calculations do not add up. Markets do not mislead in the way press conferences can. They operate on certainty, and at Hormuz, certainty is absent. This is the paradox at the heart of the conflict. The most powerful navy in history managed to eliminate roughly 90% of Iran's conventional military strength. By any historical measure, that is a staggering achievement. But Hormuz does not operate on relative success. It demands absolute certainty. The harsh reality of controlling such a narrow waterway means that shutting it down doesn't require sinking an entire convoy. One destroyed tanker, one burning wreck obstructing that 6 nautical mile passage, would be enough to halt traffic entirely. No insurer would underwrite the next voyage. The strait doesn't close purely through force. It closes through fear. And fear only needs a single example. The remaining 10% of Iran's capabilities, naval mines scattered along the seabed, mobile missile launchers hidden within mountain tunnels, and fast attack boats positioned in coastal coves, is more than sufficient to keep insurers cautious and shipping lanes empty. That is precisely why Tripoli is advancing at full speed toward a conflict that was supposedly over. The White House needed to send a signal, not just to Iran, but to financial markets, global shipping companies, and Gulf states observing from the sidelines, that the underlying risk equation had genuinely changed. Here is the part the Pentagon has carefully avoided stating outright, because acknowledging it would mean admitting an uncomfortable truth. 2 bombers can destroy ports. F-35s can level missile factories. Tomahawk missiles can strike fixed targets across Iran within minutes. But none of these systems can reliably track and eliminate hundreds of dispersed fast attack boats operating in shallow coastal waters, nor can they easily detect a naval mine quietly deployed from a small vessel in the early hours of the morning. The air campaign that dismantled Iran's conventional military encountered a fundamental limitation the moment it turned toward unconventional threats. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is not the same entity as the conventional Iranian Navy that lost dozens of ships. While the regular Navy has been largely neutralized, the IRGC Navy, the force controlling fast boats, naval mines, and key island positions at the mouth of the strait, survived the initial wave of strikes largely intact. Their operational style is different. They disperse their assets. They conceal themselves within coastal inlets. They operate out of civilian infrastructure, which U.S. targeting doctrine is often reluctant to strike. By design, they represent the segment of Iran's military that is most difficult for conventional air power to neutralize. In simple terms, this means the opening phase of the war focused on the wrong target. The strikes were visually dramatic, and satellite imagery confirmed their effectiveness. However, the forces that actually exert day-to-day control over Hormuz, small boats, naval mines, and island-based garrisons, remained largely untouched during the first 2 weeks of operations. The deployment of Tripoli is not an escalation. It is a strategic adjustment. And the fact that it took 2 weeks to implement that adjustment reveals something important about how the initial plan was constructed. Looking at a map of the Strait of Hormuz, 3 small islands immediately draw attention at its entrance: Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb. Iran has maintained control over them since 1971. For decades, this control was viewed as a geopolitical nuisance. In the context of this war, however, it has become a critical strategic advantage. These islands are more than just pieces of territory. They function as prepositioned launch platforms. From them, Iran can fire anti-ship missiles capable of covering the entire shipping corridor. They serve as staging grounds for drone swarms that can reach tankers within minutes. They act as forward supply points for small boat units and mine-laying teams, the very tools that have been most effective in disrupting traffic through Hormuz since the conflict began. Their proximity to the shipping lanes means that any response window for escort forces is measured in seconds rather than minutes. While airstrikes have targeted these islands, and some missile systems have been destroyed, replacement units are quickly installed, allowing operations to continue. Permanent suppression of fixed positions on small islands from the air is extremely difficult, largely because defenders can rebuild faster than attackers can maintain a continuous strike rhythm. In reality, the only way to truly eliminate such positions is by deploying ground forces, placing troops on the island, securing it, and preventing any enemy return. This is not a task suited for a carrier air wing. It requires a force of around 2,500 Marines, the same kind that had just spent 2 weeks in Japan rehearsing precisely this kind of mission. Exercise Iron Fist 26, completed by the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit on March 9th. Just 5 days before Tripoli was observed moving rapidly south, focused heavily on island seizure, electronic warfare, and swift amphibious assaults. The timing is far from accidental, and Tripoli's design makes it particularly well suited for this role in a way that traditional amphibious ships cannot match. Most amphibious assault vessels deploy Marines using landing craft launched from a flooded well deck, a method that requires navigating coastal waters that Iran has spent decades mining and preparing to defend. Tripoli, however, lacks a well deck entirely. Instead, its Marines are transported via MV, 22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft and C-53 heavy-lift helicopters, allowing them to bypass minefields by flying over them rather than sailing through them. Iran built its coastal defenses to counter seaborne landings, but Tripoli's Marines arrive from above. There is also an important political layer to this deployment that has received relatively little attention. While U.S. aircraft were striking Iranian targets, Gulf monarchies, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, were watching their economy suffer. Each week that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed results in severe losses in oil revenue. Sovereign wealth funds, built up over decades, are being drawn down to offset these deficits. These are not just abstract financial figures. They represent real, existential pressure on governments that underpin the U.S. strategic presence in the region. Behind closed doors, leaders in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi have delivered a consistent and urgent message to Washington. The United States initiated the conflict and dismantled Iran's conventional military, and now it must reopen the strait. The alliance structure that enables American power projection in the Middle East depends heavily on the credibility of U.S. commitments. At this point, credibility means delivering tangible results, not simply conducting more airstrikes, or holding press briefings that fail to reopen shipping lanes. Tripoli serves not only as a military asset, but also as a diplomatic signal. Its deployment communicates that Washington recognizes the gap between dramatic military action and actual economic outcomes, and is now employing a tool specifically designed to bridge that divide.